Hello. Good evening to all of you. Thank you for coming back. I hope you enjoyed this performance. I know that a lot of abstract elements were introduced and some are very traditional, some are very modern. So this particular panel, this particular group will explain to you the intervention we have done during the whole process. The group that I'm going to introduce to you firstly is myself, Chandran. Next to me is Gary Cass. He's the scientific director for the program, for the whole production. Next is Santa Bhaskar, and followed by Madhura Nayak also. She is the artist of the Saree, and Santa Bhaskar will be the DNA Carnatic music. Right? And myself, I'm the founder and director for this particular theatre group. I'm just overall to work with each individual to ensure there's a flow in the whole process, and also the amount of research undertaken has been consistent. So I kind of run through with you the process and research I've undertaken presenting this particular play. Okay, let me explain to you what BAT is all about. Biologic Art Theatre, we call it BAT. It's a research platform that strives for participatory research. That means we demand for each individual to contribute in their own manner. There's no particular style we have adopted. Even the musicians, dancers are kind of allowed and involved. Right? We strive for a broader spectrum to achieve various creative outcomes. I think that's what one of the successful particular of this particular play, that there's no particular way of looking at it. It's at times that you can't define where the DNA music is coming in because it's so much ingrained in the whole process, and that allows us to explore a broader spectrum of it. We strive for new meanings in Asian aesthetics, to interpretation of materials, narrative, and body. I think these are three fundamental elements we're looking at to relook again at Asian aesthetics. And use a systematic inquiry for the purpose of education and community engagement. This is a very important research principle because we want to create a particular system in looking at how life science actually influences visual art. I think we need this particular system because it defines the whole process. I will take through the process now. The two ways we look at system inquiry was first for the scientific perspective we looked at. So we explore the whole notion of how science can be influenced in the form of visual art or in the form of arts. Second, when science influences the elements of art or the language of art, we need to look at the symbolic representation. So these two are the important contexts that we looked at. We kind of showing a particular table here. I've kind of divided the process of systemic inquiry undertaken, followed by the scientific perspective and the symbolic representation. First, the disrobing of Draupadi actually also refers back to multiple cellular cells, which actually talks about a notion of infinity. That means the Saree, the disrobing of the concept of disrobing is actually infinity, it evolves. In this particular story, the Saree is never ending. So actually, we go back to the scientific perspective, we looked at multiple cellular cells. Okay? The DNA Carnatic, we took this particular element, the DNA sequence of cyanobacteria. This will be discussed in depth later by Gary and Santa, how they evolved to the choice of making this particular bacteria and why it was involved and how it was discovered. Followed by symbolic elements, we call it Panchabhutas. In the five Pandavas, the five brothers represent Panchabhutas, yeah? The fire, air, earth, being, and earth space. So, and it goes back to the cyanobacteria also, it's actually earthly elements. So there's certain kind of continuous investigation of one process from scientific to symbolic representation. The other one is DNA Saree. How we selected this particular sequence, Phoenix Palm, it became part of the reason for that we discussed, what we explore further with Gary and Madhura will explain about that. And also how the DNA Saree, we talk about living stories. Living story is a very important context here because it talks about the body of Draupadi, how she was violated, how the Saree is meant to reveal or conceal. These are the stories that actually explored about in this particular play. The living stories is actually explained more in one the catalog we have discussed about how this actually the living story becomes the present. That means we go back to the past the disrobing of Draupadi is actually talking about violation of the body. So we bring it back to the present. How does this story actually mean in today's context? So that becomes a living story for us. And this is how we define the whole process. First, we kind of analyze the different approach towards this. First, the disrobing. Second is the music, the Carnatic. The last is the Saree. Then we apply the scientific relationship, the material cells, followed by the sequence of cyanobacteria, then sequence of the phoenix palm. Then we make the simple representation. The disrobing Saree, disrobing of Draupadi is connected to notion infinity. The Carnatic is related to the Panchabhutas, and the DNA Saree is related to the violation of the body of Draupadi. And at this aspect, before even we talk about the artistic aspect, we felt that Gary need to explain to us, which he told us a lot, about DNA Carnatic, DNA Carnatic and DNA music. Basically, what is DNA, and that kind of explains to you how to take this journey. Gary?
Thanks, Chandra. I think first of all, what we're looking at here is we are looking to the future and around the world. Now, a lot of institutions are putting scientists and artists together in the one room, and really that's what's happened here tonight. And you can see the powerful imagery and the storytelling that we've been able to produce there. And it's quite wonderful and to use the mythologies of the Mahabharata to explain some of the scientific mythologies that's around today. And it's wonderful to be able to integrate that in and try and use the knowledge that we have. Rather than keeping these sort of two disciplines polarised, it's time that we brought them together, and this is the outcomes that we've come up with. I suppose firstly, before we need to explain a little bit about the science. I'm trying not to make it a science lesson, but really if we look at the slide there, what we've got there is what DNA is. And it really is a molecule of life. It's found in all our cells. It codes for you and me and every living organism on this planet is coded by this molecule DNA, this blueprint. So it's almost a story within ourselves that makes us who we are. But I want to really touch on this word codes, because really it's just the code of life. I'm speaking English to you, which is a code for a language. The Infinite Saree here was done in Tamil, which was a code for a language. Some people understood it, some people didn't. But the interesting thing about these codes, that you can cross over and we can interpret and change the code from the Tamil into English and so forth. So really what we're trying to do here as well with this is now change the code of life, DNA, into music, into textiles, into patterns. And really, that's what we're trying to do with this whole story here. All right? I'll pass you on to Madhura now to sort of explain how she used that DNA code and changed it now to produce a pattern.
Thank you, Gary. My name is Madhura Nayak, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Chandra and Gary for involving me in this innovative process. This concept is so innovative. I was really attracted to it, and I'm a textile designer, and I have 2 degrees already, one in textile design and graphic design, and that explains why I was able to create the saree in the first place, because we had to really implement the core that we wanted to implement it at the core of a textile structure, and making of a textile is very mathematical. So it just made my job easier, I should say, but yes, technical knowledge and scientific knowledge can be translated into art as well. And yeah, I would like to introduce 4 phases. I would like to speak to you about the 4 phases that the saree went through in this whole process of getting made. We started off with, we wanted to have a cloth. Okay, can we have, yes. If you see the cloth on the left, top left, it's a mixed weave. These have been woven by, it's been woven by me, so I was able to understand that we could translate a DNA sequence into a textile which had different motifs within the textile, so we did not have to embellish it from top. But the weaving process is very lengthy and extremely expensive. There's no looms available in Singapore. I searched high and low for a loom that would be able to do this kind of work, because a simple hand loom does not do this kind of complicated work. So I went back to India and I searched over 3 cities for a hand loom that would allow me to make the length of a sari, because the length of a sari is much larger than most of the other textiles that are being produced anywhere else in the world. And it takes a long time. I don't know if anybody of you knows about this process of textile weaving. Does anyone know how long it takes to weave, say, a meter of cloth? Maybe you, sir? Okay, so maybe I could just let you know a little bit about that. You see, every single thread that you have on your cloth right now, if it were to be hand woven on a hand loom, each thread would have to be passed through each single needle. So that's about thousands of threads that you have there. And to pass those in the correct order on a loom, it takes, for a sari, it takes almost a week just to pass the threads through the right needles, through the right process, to get the groundwork ready. So people were not willing to take up this challenge. So ultimately I had to do it myself. I couldn't leave it on somebody who did not know the process well enough. And they were not willing to break that barrier of traditional weaving. So I went back to India, and after searching high and low and 3 cities, I finally found one person willing to lend me his loom. He's a traditional weaver, and weaving is his occupation. So that's again a different story altogether. You know, there's 50 meters at a time on the loom. So it's difficult for them to just break away and allow you to use to make just 1 meter or something like that. So for experimentation, it's really difficult to come across a loom. I found this place, it's called Maheshwar. If you see that fort down there, that is Maheshwar. This is a small village near the city of Indore, which is to the north of India. And in there you see a white structure on top. In fact, there are a number of hand looms inside that structure. And the main occupation of all the villagers here is to create handloom related fabrics. So I got lucky and I found somebody who was willing to lend me the loom, and I went there and I created this piece here. But like I mentioned to you earlier, it is extremely expensive to actually weave the sari. And there were a number of considerations. We were discussing about having the DNA pattern, and we wanted the DNA pattern to be ingrained in the sari. Now, I could have just, there's so many combinations, permutation and combinations, that you could just implement the DNA pattern in a decorative fashion as a surface design or ornamentation. But that's not what we wanted. A DNA sari is completely different. We were actually weaving the infinite sari, and the infinite sari was meant for this performance, which was based on the mythological character Draupadi from the mythological epic Mahabharata, which is a very important epic in Indian tradition. It's passed on in every household from generation to generation. So you see, I didn't want it to be something frivolous. I had to have a reason to create the sari in such a way that it echoed the ethos of Draupadi. And for this, we had to do a lot of research. And again, research is again another area which I think it's better you do it yourself, because people really, they do what they can, but to go that extra mile, to break barriers and go into the dungeon and pull out is something that's useful. I think you have to take the initiative and do it yourself. So that was another aspect that I was researching on the side, and I ultimately, after about 4 or 5 months of intensive searching and talking to people, filmmakers, art historians, and textile designers, I finally found a reference book, which was a direct translation of the Sanskrit version of the original Mahabharata. And in this we found a few clues. The clues were that there was only 2 colors that were mentioned here. One was the vermilion that you find on most of the, it's a sign of matrimony, so you find it on most of the foreheads of married women. And the other was pitambar, which is brass, up there. Now we had 4 codes in the sequence. So we had only 2 colors now. So where were the other 2 colors going to come from? And during this research, we found that there was a certain kind of vest worn by the peasant community in the Mahabharata. And they used to wear this, it was called a valkala. Valkala is made from the bark of the phoenix palm. So we found our 3rd color there. And we just decided that since silk itself is a sign of royalty, and Draupadi was royalty, so the base color of silk itself was good enough to represent the 4th color. And that's how we got the 4 colors here. Now that weaving, we knew that we really couldn't go ahead with the weaving. We had to look for other options of showing this DNA on the infinite saree. And after exploring a lot of other options, like during the Mahabharata, there was also some sort of primitive dyeing that was being done. So there were processes like the tie and dye process, the bandhani process, which is traditional Indian, and then there is the ikat, which is on the top left corner. That is, you'll find it in Indonesia as well, so I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. But the people who do ikat only follow traditional patterns. They are not willing to break away from those patterns. So again, I had to do it myself. But then doing the ikat and weaving it would have again increased the cost more. So we had to look at something that we could do on the surface of a ready-made fabric to keep the cost down. And the only other process that was organic enough and which could have been possible during the Mahabharata was the block printing process. So I actually got blocks made, and then we've used these blocks to print on the saree that you saw during the performance. And then again, if you read the sequence of the DNA that we got from the phoenix palm, it runs into 30 meters of fabric. That's why you found that the fabric was so long. But then due to budgetary concerns, we only printed about 8 meters of the fabric. So you'll find if we were to print the whole sequence, there is one thing that you will find in all the DNA codes, that no 2 rows are alike. If you look at the color patterns on the saree that we have printed, you'll be able to understand that there's not a single row that is repeated. And this will hold true for all the 30 meters of fabric. And that is amazing, because now this is what we did with the infinite saree, but we can now have a DNA saree, or let's say, why call it a saree, let's call it a fabric. So a DNA fabric that will be unique to every single individual in this world. So we can have a DNA fabric for ourselves, and when our sons and daughters get married, we can pass it on as a heirloom to them, and they can have a DNA fabric of their own, which they can pass on from generation to generation. And that's why I see an infinite possibility in the DNA saree. And I think Chandra will be able to explain some more about the DNA connection in all the works. And thank you very much.
What I might do is just add a little point to Madhuri's explanation there, and it is quite fascinating, and that really the major difference between a rock and us is the randomness of that molecule. A rock's a rock and can only be a rock because it's got a repetitive nature to it. Life has become random. It's why we are what we are, and that's why Madhuri is saying that she's got 30 meters worth of lines of weaving or printmaking and so forth that will never repeat itself. That's what life is. To explain a little bit now about the music and how the musicians have come up with their pieces there, is that we just converted that code, like I mentioned earlier. There's 4 letters in the DNA code: G, C, A, and T. And combinations of them 4 letters make up every life form on this planet. So you can see what we've done is we've taken the 4 letters and their combinations, and we've said that when you see an A in the combination, give it a C. An A and a T, give it a C sharp. Give it a sound. Instead of giving life, just give it a sound. Then we've sort of added a little bit more to get more out of the notes, is that we've then stated that you can code it to be a full note and a half note. And a lot of people say, this is it, this is how it has to be. No, the only reason it is like it is because that's what we wanted it to be. And everybody else can come up with own conversions and their own formats and so forth. You can then see that in this short sequence, and really it is a short sequence that Madhura is using for her 30 metres of infinite Saree, we have much, much more than that in the DNA codes of life. And here's just one short sentence there, one line of TAA, TAC, which would code for some sort of life. But you can see there what we've done is instead of saying TAA will code for life, give it a full C, or then give it a full D sharp and so forth. From there, from that code, the musicians have taken on and then applied their own music as well. And I think I'll pass that on to Samantha. If you can hear the sound. Yep.
Santa, you want to take last two fingers?
Thank you for coming, all of you, and listening to our little research work. Thank you, Chandra and Gary and then Madhura. And I did not know how I got involved in science. I have nothing to do with science. And it is very interesting that after Gary had explained what was the code, and I called my musicians, especially he said, why don't we try it on, instrument called harmonium, where all the chords we could play. So Arun was there, that is Arun, and he played the harmonium, and then with violin we tried the chords. So that became a melody, and we didn't know what the melody is. Is there a name for that melody? Because in Carnatic music, every melody have a name, and we have each melody have a note, and the 7 notes, as you all know, like in Western music too. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, like we have sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, sa. So I'm coming back, sa, ni, da, pa, ma, ga, re, sa. It is a particular raga. It's called, the melody is called Maya, Maya, Madhava, Gavla. And but in this particular DNA code, when we played, it became a ragam called Saudamini. The name was Saudamini, or it was called Anandavalli. In the beginning, we thought it was a different ragam. It was called Sumane Ranjini. But then we found out from the research, from the books, that Sangeeta Ratnakara and then the musical text which we have, we found that ragam was not Sumane Ranjini, it was called Saudamini or Anandavalli, which there are no compositions created by any of those saints. Those are the saints who have composed Carnatic music, and then we all play those, we sing and dance those compositions. But none of them have composed any compositions in this particular rag. It was pretty interesting to us. So that is how the melody became, we call it now DNA melody, or we can say that it is Saudamini Ragam or Anandavalli Ragam. And the rhythm which we found was very interesting, too complicated, nothing to do with Carnatic music rhythm or even North Indian music rhythm, because generally we have rhythms are like 4, 5, 3, 7 and 9. In here it is very complicated. It is 40 and a half, one line of the song. It goes, if you count it, it's 14 and a half rhythm, which is so complicated to play on drums or even to sing or to play on an instrument. So when you double it, it is 81 counts, which it's pretty hard to play. So I would like to, ask my musicians to play the ragam and then the rhythm to you separately so that you have an understanding. And you please tell me where this was inserted in the production. I think that will help me to, whether we know that, like you understood what we did it, called Infinite Saree. Can you play the melody, Arun, for me? And you will sing the notes, Manay. That is Sajid. He was vocal and then he was playing violin. They are all, 3 in 1, 2 in 1 people. Okay. There are 5 notes. So those are the notes that repeated many times in the production with Terukuthu. And the rhythm, can you please explain the rhythm? Play the rhythm for me.
Takka, takka, di, mi, takka, di, mi, takka, di, mi, takka, di, mi.
Mridangam, that instrument is called Mridangam. He plays Kathakali instrument like Chanda and Mathalam and all other instruments, percussion instruments. As I told you, they are all multi-talented, so it was easy for me to work with them. They are our past musicians. Okay, now I do not know whether, is that okay, Chandra, whether we could ask the audience where they found
you want to ask them where they found the music, or you want to go to the...
Just wanted to know whether they found anywhere.
Have anybody heard of this music before, from your understanding? No, I'm not sure yet. Okay, let's come back to answer a question later, but now you want to go and show some videos of what we have, during the performance we have introduced some DNA, where the intervention of DNA music will come through, so they give you a perspective of all the information, the perspective of how the Carnatic music come in, DNA Carnatic. I believe they give you an understanding where was the music introduced during the performance and play. Just to kind of give you the intention of this research and what were the expected outcomes. I think we kind of have achieved certain outcomes, we believe we did. And these are the things that we're looking forward to expand further. With DNA Carnatic, DNA Saree, we provided new interpretation of Asian aesthetics. I think this is the beginning of us to explore the Asian aesthetics that we interpreted now. The living stories explore the mythology of the body, the stories of Mahabharata, stories of Draupadi, we have redefined it again. Very notion of our body we define now. It's not just a mythological understanding, it's more beyond, it's moved into life science. It's become so alive to us that we can feel that our pain is our pain. So that becomes living to us to life sciences. And the systematic inquiry allows one to interpret the meaning of body, material, and narrative from Asian perspective. I might say that, you know, at the moment, a lot of things at present, a lot of us are trying to intervene or recreate what Asian aesthetics is all about. But for us, we want to implement a particular system in investigating these particular aesthetics, because aesthetic as a language, so it has evolved to a particular system of inquiry, and I think that's important. Whenever science as a system, art is based on process, so we felt that this particular process and system will come to one point of investigation. We need to allow the science to come in and get this intervention. Therefore, the whole process is evolved today, and that is what is achieved. I believe so. Yeah. And I think basically this is where our presentation ends. So we want to leave it to the ground for you guys, for you all to give us, if there's answer questions. So please do feel free to ask some questions. We do have some. So I'll leave it to the ground to respond now. Any questions that you would like to know and share, or any knowledge that you want to share with us? If you have any questions, something that doubts that you have in your mind. Yeah, so for sure.
Thank you, the team, for this wonderful production. I'd just like to congratulate and comment on this wonderful achievement, because being a musician myself, I would like to commend deeply for the wonderful inaugurative research for this wonderful musical aspect as well as rhythmic aspect, because 14.5 beat is very difficult to imply, right? And secondly, to the designer who has come up with the DNA saree is really amazing, because I didn't know that many needles we need to what we are wearing now. And very much like to thank you for this wonderful production, because I really enjoyed it thoroughly, and I've got no questions. I just want to commend you all for that. Thank you.
Any other comments, suggestions, or questions that you'd like to share with us? Well, we're also thinking a bit more. I think we all went through a particular. I just want to share the journey that all of us went through. You know, it's very important to you all know that we are. In fact, we all understand this unknown territory. I mean, for us, is that we have not understood. I mean, ourselves when we're taking this particular journey. So we come to a point to let each of us nurture each other's process and evolve it. So going back in time, I think it was in 2007. That's where I met Gary in a cafe. We talked about, let's do a theater with DNA, you know. And it took us 6 years to where we are today, actually. You know, we did we developed the ideas, we couldn't get funding. Finally, I must thank NAC for giving us this grant. Thank you very much. And I mean, you know, for us in Singapore, it's very important for us to make this kind of intervention. I think it's not just making, it's about making market history. I think we did. I mean, we did. You know, I think we want to do that because it's our journey. We as an artist, you know. I mean, I still like to call Gary as an artist, even though we claim he's a scientist. But he has this mind of evolving with us, you know. I think we want to do this kind of work that actually put us into the contemporary world, in the world that we can create things. Well, going back to the story about how we evolved, is that the way I met Madhura was amazing, because honestly, we did a lot of workshops. I mean, we did a couple of workshops, 2 workshops, invited a lot of Singaporean artists. Unfortunately, we couldn't get them to get involved with us, because firstly, for them it's unknown. Secondly, they also have the fear of not getting into what they want to know. They're not sure. So we really, after the 3rd workshop, then we discovered, I would like to discover Madhura. And then we felt that Madhura had that the capacity to understand the whole process. Also the talent she brings in her creative process of weaving was so great that we found Madhura, and we were very excited to have her on the board. So then we brought Madhura in. With Santa Bhaskar, I worked with her many years. When I was a young, when I was 24 years old as an artist. That's the first project I did with her as a color chakra. We did a performance with dancers, and they were danced below in the knee level. The dancers still in Bhaskar Academy. So that's why I met her. She's my teacher, and I respect her as a guru. I think when I met her, when I returned back in 2007, I went and talked to her and said, look, Santa, I have this idea, what do you think? I'm sure she kind of was very confused, Chandra, I don't know what you're saying. So I said, well, then I kind of, take her through the process of what DNA and the whole idea of creating this particular project. I believe then again, we couldn't, even I was very honest, I couldn't materialize what we're getting into, honestly. Then eventually I invited Gary over, then two of us had a lot of discussion. Then we agreed about this project. So we launched this, we started this project a year ago, 2010, and we did a couple of workshops. Eventually this is where we arrived. To us, this is a small step for a new beginning, we believe so. And this is what you're all witnessing, the whole history today. Any questions that you want to ask? Okay, it's no question, at least you can talk to us. Before I end this presentation, definitely I'd like to thank Bhaskar Art Academy for supporting, especially the musicians and the artists. Let me introduce all the musicians. Come, please.
Without them, I think we wouldn't have done this job. There is Biju, who was Dushasana, the evil one who disrobed Draupadi. That is Santosh, who was the Kattiyakaran, the person who introduced all these artists. That is Duryodhana, Dushasana's brother, Prasad. That is Hare Krishnan, I introduced earlier, that's percussionist, harmonist, and he's a veena player too. Arun, I will tell you that. Sajid, who is a vocalist and violinist, yeah. So without them, I don't think we would have done this job. And then that was Draupadi, will you come forward? Panchali. I made her sing, cry, lament in the DNA rhythm. And I call the DNA rhythm Amla Thalam. Amla means acid in Sanskrit. So rhythm in Amla, that is acidic rhythm. If you wanted to translate that in English, it's called Amla Thalam. And Nibin who did lighting. Nibin, will you? Yeah. And Suman who did sound. Perfect sound. I think we were very happy with all the contact mics and everything. Nibin, please do come. He's a dancer too, who's a yoga teacher. Yeah, and then his passion is to do lighting. So we didn't have money to engage professional, lighting designer. So we had to ask help from our own people. I just want to share with you. One of my students told me, she's a life science student doing research at university. And when I told her about this, she couldn't come today. She told me, Auntie, I think it's a good idea to teach science through traditional arts to schools. So we would like to introduce this to schools so that children can understand science in a very easy way. This is what it is, or DNA is all about. I think Chandra and Gary will agree with me, I'm sure. So teach science through traditional art form. So I choose Terukuttu, that's a street play which is a very raw theatre. But I've seen even the costume is very raw. It's made out of straw and So I chose that. I would have done in Bharatanatyam style or any other dance style, weaving movement and all those things I could have done it. It's not a problem for me. Using the same music, which is all with composed music. But I didn't want to do it. I thought whatever we did was very raw. So let me find a raw theatre. That's why I ended up in doing Terukuttu. It's a street play which is very, very raw theatre. There is no rule in this theatre at all. They have no rule. There's nothing that you shouldn't do except, even you should have seen before Dushansana scolding, he used abuse words, very bad Tamil words, scolding Draupadi. Before that, he taken like doing a arti, that's like a ritual to say, excuse me for scolding you. That touches you at times, because it's a traditional art form, although it is a raw theatre, but there are some rules and regulations which goes with the heritage and with our values. You don't scold a person and you take pardon to that. Excuse me, then I scold you. It is in English you say that. I'm sorry scolding you, and then you abuse your words. So that's what he did it in the theatre, you see. So it's very, very interesting. The whole process of traditional theatre is very, very interesting. That's why I chose Terukut especially for that. So that makes our day like, okay. Thank you so much.
Before the slide, I would like to thank two of my family members, Maya and Saras, who was carrying the one carrying the. Thanking and not finished yet. First, I'd like to thank Santa. Really, she has given this platform for us. Madhura Nayak, definitely she's a great artist. For Gary, thank him for never enough for me, because he's the one who bear my madness all the time, and we enjoyed ourselves working. Thank you, Gary. Finally, thank you all of you here tonight to release this particular. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming back joining us. Good evening again. I'm sure you're wondering over how they have intervened these particular two main elements in DNA, Saree and DNA Carnatic. This presentation will take you through the process that we have engaged, the way we discover the application of life science into theatre. So before I start, let me introduce the collaborators who are with us. First, Chandrasekhar. Myself, next to Ms. Gary Cass, a scientific director. Next is Madhura Nayak, the guest artist we invited to the workshop. Santa Bhaskar, as you know, most of you know her. She's a veteran and she's a culture medallion. And she comes Theatre's Bhaskar Academy. Just give you an idea of what the BAT is all about. Biological Arts Theatre, we call it BAT. The aims for it is to set up a research platform that strives for participatory research. That means we allow more engagement with the directors. We allow the musicians to give input. We allow the dancers to give input. We become more participatory. So we want to engage further beyond the artistic direction. Second, strive for broader spectrum to achieve various creative outcomes. I think this theatre play we have seen today actually pushes the various creative outcomes that we have investigated. Strive for new meaning in Asian aesthetics, to interpretation of materials, narrative and body. I'll take through that later, what I meant by that. And also use a systematic inquiry for the purpose of education and community engagement. Systematic inquiry is a research principle that we applied here to investigate the whole process, because we're dealing with life science, we're dealing with system. With art, we're dealing with process. So we need to kind of engage these two definitions as a point that we're able to analyze how this flow happens. The systematic inquiry is divided into two perspectives. One is scientific perspective, the other is symbolic representation. I've divided into three different columns. As you can see, the systematic inquiry is defined in different perspectives. One is disrobing of Draupadi, as you've seen during the play. One is introduction, DNA Carnatic, that's where the music comes in, and the material itself, the DNA Saree. Okay, what is the scientific perspective? The first one, disrobing of Draupadi, is related to multicellular cells. How the cell actually evolve by itself. It's not single, it's multicellular. And for the DNA Carnatic, we rely on the sequence, DNA sequence as a material, as bull algae. And the DNA Saree, we took it from DNA sequence and Phoenix palm. Okay, how we arrived at this later, Madhura and with Gary and Santa explain how we kind of identify these particular materials. With symbolic representation, For disrobing Draupadi, we refer to ever-ending sari. Sari becomes notion infinity. I can see that in the flow of sari. With DNA Carnatic, we refer to the earthly elements, the Pancha Buddhas. For the Indian, we use the Pancha Buddhas. First is the fire, the air, the wind, and earth space. The 5 elements related to the earth elements. For the sari, we connect to the living stories. Living story is about the violation of the human body. At one point in time, she had been sari meant to conceal as reveal. At one point in time, her hair that she had been meant to beautify, she had been trapped by the hair. Now, these are the stories that evolved, that we have evolved through the process. And this is how we define the term as living stories, bringing the past to the present. Yeah? These are the fundamental research methods we apply during the process. And I'll hand over to Gary to talk about the DNA Carnatic in DNA, especially the scientific perspective of what's DNA and how it evolved.
Thanks, Chandra. All right, before I do go into an explanation, and it'll be a simple, quick explanation about DNA, no need to make it too complex, but really what I want to also say is one of the aims of this group, this theatre, is to get scientists and artists to work together. And really, if you look back the history of these two disciplines, it's been a long history of these two the artists and scientists working together, but only just recently, in the last few decades, they've started to be polarised. And I think it's very important now in our future to bring these two disciplines back together. Disciplines that both can be creative, okay? We can have artistic and scientific creativity. And I think it's very important because we can use the sort of mythologies of the Mahabharata to try and explain some of the scientific mythologies that we have out there and try and make sense of life and a future that we're going into. So it's very important that we take these two disciplines together as one. Just quickly on to DNA, and let me give you a little bit of background then. DNA is found in every living cell, so all life is determined by the code of DNA. And I'll use that word again and again and again, a code. It is the code for life. It's in every cell. You can see it there coming down to the left on the chromosomes, and then again into the structure of the DNA and the genes that make us who we are. And there's really 4 letters that I want you, and you'll see them being repeated over in a few slides here, and that's A, T, G, and C. And it's combinations of them 4 letters, only them 4 letters, that make us who we are, make us different to other people and to other things. And that's quite important. And really, it also is random, and I know that Madhura is going to talk about that, because the major difference between you and a rock is that a rock is repetitive in its crystal structure, and your crystal structure is random, allowing you enough information storage to create life. Really, life is all about randomness. Okay? I'll pass you over to Munduri now, and she'll explain then how she took them 4 letters, A, T, C, and G, and took it into the production of the sari.
Thank you, Gary. Good evening, everyone. My name is Madhura Nayak. I'll give you a quick background about myself. I'm currently pursuing my master's in fine arts from LaSalle. And before I start, I would like to thank Gary and Chandra for inviting me to be part of this innovative concept. And I would also like to thank Dr. Ian Wu, who's been a very strong guiding force and who's always encouraged me to break barriers and try to do something new. There were 4 phases in the making of this sari. Initially, the first thing that came to mind when we thought of weaving the sari was to weave it in a pattern that would create a cloth of a mixed weave, the one that you see to your left, top right. And there were a lot of ways and methods that we could have implemented the DNA code as a motif in the structural design of a cloth. So we needn't have looked at surface ornamentation at all, but we'll talk about that a little later. So I couldn't find a loom in Singapore where I could weave a cloth that was this complicated. A simple loom does not do this kind of work, although it is possible. So I went back to India and I searched I was searching over 3 cities for a considerably long time until I finally found a loom, and we'll come to that as well later. But then initially we were just discussing translating the DNA code into a material, a sari. But considering that this sari was meant to be used in this performance, and this performance is about Draupadi, who was a central character in the Indian mythological epic, the Mahabharata. We couldn't have something that was frivolous, you know. We couldn't have something that was just a translation of 4 letters as motifs or as ornamentation. So that meant that we had to really research, and we had to back up the design that we finally implemented with a lot of research about the time of the Mahabharata and the textiles of the time. So again, it wasn't easy to find reference material that was authentic enough. And after about 4 or 5 months of searching, I finally came across a book that was a direct translation of the Sanskrit version of the Mahabharata. And only 2 of these books exist today, and I was lucky to find it. And there we found references of the colors. And you'll find the first A is a yellow color, which is the pitambari, which is brass. The second color we found was red. Red, as you know, is a sign of matrimony in India. And since Draupadi was married with 5 husbands, it made sense to have red there. Then we had the brown color of the tree bark of the phoenix palm. Now this was very important of how to get the 3rd color, because there were no more clues. These were the only 2 colors mentioned, red and pitambar. So there were a few other vests that were mentioned that were worn by the peasants of the time. And these vests were made out of the bark of the phoenix palm. So that's how we got the color of the 3rd color, and we decided to use the DNA code of the phoenix palm. Because we wanted to have earth elements in the sari, and if we would have woven it, we would have been able to probably incorporate elements from the earth, but it was not really sure whether we were going to get a loom or not. So we decided that if we were to ornament it in a surface design, then we would have to have a color that represented the phoenix palm. And the 4th color was the base color of silk. Now silk has been also known to be worn by royalty since a long time, and wool, silk and leather have been mentioned in the Mahabharata as materials that were used for clothing. So we were pretty sure that we've got all the right materials now. But now we had to actually implement it in the sari, and it was not easy, because now that weaving seemed to be a very far away, distant dream, we had to look at surface ornamentation. And for surface ornamentation, there's a lot of sophisticated machinery available today. But at the time of the Mahabharata, even if there was any printing, it would have been very primitive. We couldn't source any motifs of the time, although we had a lot of ideas of what the motifs could have been. But we couldn't just pick up something that we thought existed. So we decided to use a primitive method of surface ornamentation. And if you see to your right, top left, you'll find the ikat pattern. The ikat is a traditional Indian pattern of tie and dye, resist method. And it's also very popular in Indonesia, so I'm sure a lot of you are aware about how it is done, and you've seen these kind of materials. Now when I spoke to a few weavers who do this kind of weaving, the threads have to be dyed before the weaving is done. So when I spoke to them about getting it done, nobody was willing to take up the challenge, simply because it's a means of livelihood for them, and from generation to generation they have been following only certain motifs, and they do not want to break away from those motifs. So it was up to me to just go and create the fabric on my own. But on the side, until I got a loom, I had to create the sari, like, just in case I didn't get a loom. So surface ornamentation in a different method was necessary, and we looked at block printing. So the one that you see on the bottom left corner, or right corner, is block printing. I got blocks made, especially for this, and we got it printed. Would anyone know how long block printing takes? Anyone? Maybe you, ma'am? Okay, let's say we got printed only 8 meters of the fabric. A sari is usually 6 meters long, but the DNA code, the DNA sequence of the phoenix palm that we've used is 30 meters long. So if you look at this, there are 30 rows of 45 inches each. So we could, as per the budget that I was allotted, we could only print 8 meters. So the sari you see during the performance is the sari that we printed in this manner. It took us 10 days of 12-hour shifts to print 8 meters of fabric. And by that time I just got lucky. I must say that a friend of mine got back to me from both the cities, and one said that, you know, maybe we could help you do it. And then when I spoke to them, they backed out. They didn't want to do it. But then I went to another small town, a much smaller town, which is called Maheshwar. So you see the palace on the bottom left is from the village of Maheshwar, which is near the city of Indore, which is to the north of India. So I went there, and one of the traditional weavers was very kind enough to lend me his loom, and they also did a lot of groundwork for me, so it was just ready for me to go there and weave it. And since we wanted to do the ikat and they were not willing to do it, we had to use a method of our own. So I actually did the dyeing on the loom itself, because the pattern that you see here is very random. It is almost impossible to weave, to have the ikat done in the traditional method. So we actually dyed the fabric while it was on the loom. So there is a warp and a weft. So the warp is laid out first. And would anyone know how weaving is done? I guess not. Okay, so if you look at the materials that you're wearing right now, just to probably thread those many threads onto a loom before you start weaving the weft into it, it takes almost a week. Because each thread is so thin, there's a lot of breakages, a lot of entanglement. So when it is done in the traditional method, it takes almost a week just to put the threads through the right needles in the right method. So the groundwork was ready for me, and I went there and actually wove this sample that you have here. And of course, because it was expensive, we haven't gone ahead yet with making the whole sari, but I'm looking forward to doing that. And thank you for listening to me, my story, and I'll hand over to Gary.
Thanks, Madhura. I think, yeah, Madhura's saying is that there's 30 meters of pattern there that will be totally random, and then that becomes a problem when you need to print or weave that. I'm looking in the audience and I'm starting to see some batik, which again is very repetitive in its nature, and a lot of the patterns that we use in our weave and so forth is very repetitive, probably for that reason, in that it's too hard when we go random. So we need to start thinking about techniques of how to get these random patterns together. All right, what I've got here up on the slide is really how we converted the DNA into music. And really what we need, again, to think about is these codes. I'm speaking to you in English, and it really is a code, isn't it, for language. People that are English speaking will understand that. The play tonight, the theatre tonight, was in Tamil. That's a code. And unless you know that code, you don't understand what they're saying. DNA is also, like I mentioned earlier, is a code for life. Now, if they're all codes, music's a code. Music's just a code for sound. It's just a code to generate some sort of sound. The great thing about codes is that we can swap them over. We can exchange them. We can have these arbitrary conversions. So it's really up to us, depending on what we want it to sound like or what we want it to tell us. And so you'll see up on the slide there that we've got some DNA codes, AA, and really I suppose what we need to think about is that when we see these 4 letters, A, T, C and G, that will give it a note. We'll just tell it to play a note. So whenever it sees AA in the code, it'll play a C. But also if it sees a T in there before that, I'll come back to this and explain in the next slide, it'll play a full note, a half note and all the rest of it. And you'll see that we actually use the harmonium down here to actually start to generate some music. Along the top there, we have our code, just a part of the billions and billions of code that we have, that we know about life. TAA really means that to play a full note of a C. TAC means play a full of a D sharp and so forth. So, and again, that seemed to be very European when it came to the Tamil music and so forth. Even that sort of was hard to read. And therefore, you'll see that then the musicians had to then translate it into something that they understood. And from there, then we generated some of the music that you heard in the theatres now. I'm not going to play that because I'm going to pass it over to Santha, who's going to explain a bit more about the music.
Thank you for coming. And thank Chandra and Gary and Madhura for being with me. I think when Gary brought those DNA codes, and I'm so sorry, I'm not going to read from what is written on the screen, okay, because it is a bit technical. I thought I will go more practical to what we have to, discuss today. And when he brought the codes and asked me whether we could, improvise that into an instrument, whether we could play. So I called my musicians. That is Arun, who is a veena player, and then he plays harmonium. That instrument is called harmonium. And that is Sajid. He's a violinist, plus he is a vocalist too. And Hari is a mridangist. So I called both of them first. I didn't call Hari first. I called Arun and then Sajid to play those chords, whether we could improvise that play that into their instrument. They played that particular notes. Then that was like, it was 5 notes melody. And Indian music, we have, each melody have a name. And we, on that particular spot, that when they played it on it sounded like a raga called, a melody called Sumane Saranjini. So we thought, okay, this is what Sumane Saranjini is all about. We kept on practicing the same thing, and that 5 notes kept ringing back again. Then we found that there is something wrong in one of that Ni and Ga, which is the 2 swaras. They are slightly different than the particular raga. We went back again thinking, with 2 or 3 of us, we still talk about what melody could be this, you see. Then only last month we found that that particular raga was called Saudamini or Anandavalli. That was found only in one particular book. It was not in that text that we saw earlier in the Ratnas, written by early masters. And there was no composition done in that particular melody by any of the saints. So it was not a very important or a famous melody that people sang or composed music. So I do not know why was not, that particular raga was not, popularized by any of the music composers. So I will ask Arun to play that melody for you, that which connected, that is the Arohana, Avarohana, that's ascending and descending notes, Sagama, Panisa, Sanipa, Magasa. So can you play that for us? Thank you, Arun. And the same thing that later we found, there was a rhythm for that particular chord. That is what Gary brought again to me. He said there is a rhythm for it. So we found that rhythm had 40.5 beat, or what we call it Akshara Kalam. Akshara Kalam means like one Akshara is a letter. That was it. So it became like 40.5 when you multiply it, is 81 beat in one. I do not know whether Madhura had anything to do that with this. I am not sure, because we never, I never discussed that with her. So I do not know. There are 81, beats in it or not. I am not so sure. So we put that into drums. So I called Hari to play mridangam for me, and then we decided, okay, this particular, we do not have this particular rhythm in Carnatic music or in any of the Indian other musicologists have come out with this kind of a rhythm. Can you play that for me? Yeah, that is 81 Achara Kalamidis, or 81 letters. So where did, why it is like for Terukuttu I have to use this. Like when Chandra asked me to do infinite sari, I thought, what am I going to do? I did scratch my head. Okay, what will I do for infinite sari? Because it's normally done, Draupadi's, disrobing is done in Terukuttu, and then it can be done in Kathakali, or you can even, choreograph that into Bharatanatyam, other technique of Indian classical dance, traditional dance form. And I'm a Bharatanatyam choreographer and a dancer. And I've learned a bit of Kathakali. So why did I didn't learn Terukuttu? I only know that Terukuttu we were practicing Terukuttu with our artist. I thought whatever we have found is very raw material, and then traditional Terukuttu is also very raw. You should have seen all the costumes are made out of even raw material. And I thought of that will merge to that, because DNA, what we found is also very raw, and then theatre is also raw. So that is why I connect Terukuttu for this infinite sari. And then I would like to introduce my artist. Will you come, Biju, and then this is Biju, who was Duryodhana, the evil, very, very evil. Dushasana, the very, very evil one. Okay. He was Katyakaran, the one who introduced the story. That was Duryodhana, more evil than him. That is Draupadi, Arshakumari. She is a vocalist plus now she is practicing Terukuttu. Okay, they are all Kathakali dancers plus they practice Terukuttu. So most of them are 2-in-1 people. Then maybe I don't know, anybody 3-in-1 over here. Okay, and I used the melody and then the beats in first. I thought of it when Panchali was lamenting. Her lament should be in that particular rhythm. Today it became a bit louder, so I'm sorry. Yesterday was much more, sound was a bit louder today. And her lament was done in this particular 81 beat rhythm. And then they played the rhythm plus the melody together while she was singing. And they improvised steps. I didn't choreograph anything. It was Biju and then Prasad. Biju did the feet movement for that particular rhythm. So it was, without them, I won't be able to, answer all these, questions, or whether I won't be able to, explain anything about DNA. And with their help, actually, we managed to do this production as the, it's the first installation. It can be the first step towards our coming together, finding DNA. I didn't know what was DNA was all about. When Chandra came and told me, it is DNA, this what DNA, I do not know. Where does DNA come from? I didn't know, because I'm not a science student. I'm an artist, you see. So then only, now I learned what is DNA. It was like, it's an eye-opening for me. There is possibility, abundant possibility for creating art. And I was telling to them yesterday also, we can teach science through traditional art form for school students. I think that's what I found out from this learning process. I learned DNA, and through practicing this art form, practicing or choreographing or coming together. I think that was pretty good, and then I think we should be looking into that, I suppose. Okay, I would like to introduce Needin, who did lighting for us before. Will you see? Yeah. and Nirmala for doing the catalogue. Thank you, Nirmala.
We're going to show a video of where the interventions happened. So just recap certain series of the clementing and the footsteps of the DNA. Yeah. So that gives you an idea of how the DNA Sarees and DNA Carnatic was intervention. Just kind of round up the objective or research outcome for this particular web project. With DNA Carnatic and DNA Saree, it provides a new interpretation to Asian aesthetic. I think we started to get the kind of different intervention into Asian aesthetics. Living stories explore the mythology of the body. The living stories is about how Draupadi's body being violated and how she revealed in the course of the king and the process of notion of body. And this is something that we are going to extend further in a series of other series of work that comes through. Systematic inquiry allows one to interpret meaning of body, material, narrative from Asian perspective. We're giving you how material function, how narrative taken, the material they used by the costumes, by the dancers. All these are part of the systematic inquiry was involved in it. So you don't just select it, it was very carefully analyzed. And this is what the bad objective is all about, to make sure there's a kind of approach to this particular understanding. Like I said before, this is life sciences and arts coming together at one point. And certain investigation, certain understanding necessary. And this is how we went into looking at this process. And I think we have almost come to the end of the presentation. And like you see, we'd like to credit Bhaskar Academy, definitely National Council, and also the dancers over here. Thank you very much. Now we will go to the ground and ask some questions and answers or suggested comments. Please do. Yeah. Any questions and answers? Mahasha?
It was really refreshing to experience something that is experimental like this and tries to bring science and arts together, which I think is very important. I have a really wild kind of question, which I don't know if we even have an answer to that, and that's resonance. DNA and resonance. Is it possible, because mind is creating all of this, and the relation of mind and reality, mind and body, it's all coming from the mind. Is it a possible outcome that if the DNA coding is presented in art, either through visual expression or through oral expression, that the mind may resonate to that, and it may in fact have some impact on us psychologically, spiritually, that we would actually resonate like looking at a mirror? Because if it is our coding, and we're listening to our coding or seeing our coding, is that like looking at a mirror, and does it have some spiritual implication?
I think absolutely you're right. Because ultimately, by listening to your DNA, you're almost, or looking at your own DNA, you're almost looking at your molecular, the ultimate in molecular nudity, isn't it? And that's what biotechnology and genetic engineering is doing to us, to life now and really in the future, is that it's going to break us down to a molecule, reboot, rebuild, regenerate. Really, that's what the possibilities are. So, you know, to actually listen to us now, see the DNA that makes us now, compared to what the possibilities are, it would be quite tremendous to listen to that differences and so forth, and spiritually as well. So, yeah.
Have there been studies to explore that?
The actual listening
The
to
impact?
I don't know. That's the honest answer, but I do know that UCLA is doing some amazing studies on this, that they're using it from a medical point of view. They're trying to listen to DNA to see if they can listen to mistakes. Huntington's disease is one that they found repetitiveness in it. Once you start seeing repetitiveness in a molecule like DNA, you start to question whether that's right. So, but looking at it further than that scientific way, I'm not too sure, and I'm not sure. And maybe that's the start of a way of, you know, looking at it more from an artistic point of view in this type of field.
I think I understand the question of vibration, the body vibration. I think if you go back to a little bit of Indian yoga, there's a lot of vibration. The energies evolve to vibration. I think, like, I want to say that we started unknown territory now. We start walking the unknown territory. There's a lot of possibilities to investigate. And going back to your form of thinking, I think I would look into yoga where the body vibration and the DNA vibration takes over. And there is a possibility to look into it. Like Gary said, I cannot give you an answer yet. We still started beginning to investigate DNA. I think it's a new beginning for us, ourselves. Yeah.
Can I show you something very quickly that may actually, you might. This is a program that's a prototype which should be out by the end of the year, and it's called Identity, where it's going to actually allow you to listen to your DNA. Okay? It'll ideate the audio, it will take image of you, of your face, it'll use facial recognition. It'll ask you some simple questions about your appearance. And we know the codes for all this. We know the codes that will give us our rolling of tongues and our widow's peaks and cheek dimples and all the rest of it. Then what it does is it will actually allow you to give you a code. There's still some glitches here that was developed on a Macintosh. I'm trying to put it to PC. It doesn't seem to work, but that's all that. And then you can actually listen to your own. I like it in a glockenspiel, but it'll play your DNA music. Loud, unfortunately, but you know, here straight away, am I feeling calmer now spiritually because I can hear my own DNA? Maybe in the glockenspiel, but I'm in the this one. You can't hear it, sorry, but some of them are quite dark actually, so it's quite interesting just in the music players.
I think there's a lot of possibility to expand from here. John?
That's very interesting because Pythagoras, if he actually existed, had a lot to say about music and science, and music and science were part of the quadrivium, considered the most important things to learn.
Yeah.
But the definition of music had a very cosmic perception then, and the harmony of the spheres and all. It was music and mathematics and science were actually viewed as the same thing in ancient Greece.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I just heard that it's a German Spanish.
Any other questions, anyone, John? Anybody else? Any other comments, suggestions? Yes, Nirmala.
I want to say that I just want to make a comment that the 81 lead Tala, from an artistic standpoint, and for me it worked very, very well. Something happened at that moment when that Tala came in. It shifted the emotion. It did something to the emotional graph, I felt. And it was very unexpected. And somewhere it helped draw that parallel between something that's happening and then a moment that you haven't predicted. Maybe that is that violation in the moment of intense pain. So that was just something I thought I should share with you, that it worked very well for me.
Any other comments and questions? I think, look, I mean, this, yes, like I mentioned before, it's just the beginning of unknown territory. I think we still started something new, something to move from here to further as much as we can. Yes, Robert.
Well, my questions, it's going to be impossible to answer, but of course, being unmoored and never having seen this form of theatre at all, it was a privilege to see it and most enjoyable. Is it very different from how, I mean, this is the question. We're not in any position to judge the difference. I'd love to hear what was just said. But do a lot of other people in the audience actually hear that it's different?
Any difference?
Which doesn't prove anything. I was just interested to know. I mean, you're capable of hearing it, but
yeah, probably attuned to
Yeah.
What kind of DNA, which DNA do you use in your experimentation?
Which DNA do you use?
Yeah.
Okay, Gary, you want to explain?
We used, I think in the Saree we used phoenix palm. Now we have
Okay.
of the
What
tree.
nationality is that? What cultural background is that?
From the Himalayas.
Okay.
Isn't that an interesting question? From what nationality does DNA come from?
No, it is.
Because
I'm sorry.
really,
It is.
yeah.
Because I'm not going to bother you here, bore you now, but I have come across when people, for example, of a particular cultural background, but that has never been the culture, responding musically, dance-wise, to that other culture's presentation. I don't say it is a DNA or anything, but it is interesting because the music that they play, and you ask Sandra to play, I understand it. Well, I'm Indo-European, so that's fine, I suppose. But that's why I want to know would it have any impact if it was not from that area of the world? What if you had used a German DNA, for example?
Okay, for the Saree we use the phoenix palm DNA.
Yeah.
For the music, we actually use bacterial DNA.
Okay, do I ask what
Actually, believe it or not, I think it was, no, you can't put a nationality surely in bacteria.
No. I don't know. How about the Asian flu?
But why that particular bacteria?
Okay, we go back to the way we define this process. So,
All right, the reason that we use cyanobacteria, from an evolutionary point of view, when we first started this project, we were going to try and explain the theory, the scientific theory of evolution using the mythology of the Mahabharata. Cyanobacteria is very significant in the evolution of all of us because it was the first climate changer on this planet. You know, we tout ourselves as being the first and we're changing the climate now. No, it's happened many times before, and possibly cyanobacteria was one of the first bacteria to spew out a toxic gas called oxygen. Now, because of its spewing out of toxic oxygen, which it would have been back 3.5 billion years ago, evolution has now brought us this far. So I picked that bacteria specifically because of the significance that this single-celled bacteria did for us to evolve.
And what is the relation of that concept to Carnatic music? Why did you put those two together?
When Gary talk about this particular film material, it's very much earthy elements. So we go back to the earthy elements of Panchabhutas. So we felt that the relationship of the five Pandavas are coming together. So we want to relate back to the Pandava stories of the five elements. That's how we connected this material to the Panchabhutas.
Also, again, the Saree was representative of this DNA molecule, almost this infinite possibility that this molecule has. You know, and so we've seen that DNA and the Saree has been significant.
I think this is a very important, like I said, the important relationship you're looking for when you come to particular mythologies and life science. The important representation where it comes through. It was a thorough understanding where you want to take this, which bacteria you want to use for what particular stories. And these are the things that we went to process of immense discussion and to understand the importance of each bacterial element. You know, Mahabharata, this particular story, Mahabharata, that's a small part of it. It's more to go. We're going to come out another 2 series. One's got the birth of under Gandharis, the birth of under Gandharis. Sorry, birth of sons of under Gandharis is one. Another one is Vishwarupa, the coming of Vishnu. So there's the next 2 phases we're working on. So let's go to another phase that we're going to expand with the DNA, virtual reality, and whatever technology that comes in. So BAG is actually a platform to research. I think they've not gone into big production yet. We don't want to go into big production. We want to use a form of investigation, and this is our intention to do that.
But I think you asked about why Carnatic music. Isn't it at the first point of connection between the life sciences and the living story, the myth, the mythology, and then when it came to the expression of that mythology, you decided alternatively, and then that's as a consequence, Carnatic music came in, the rhythm came in. I think, but the first point of contact is the myth.
The story of that, the myth of Draupadi. The story of Draupadi was the first beginning, because when I was talking to Santa about different stories, they look at 3 different stories, and she felt that Infinite Saree is the first thing they were to move in, and she also wanted to talk about there's already a narration existing, and there's a music that she was looking at a particular way of expressing this particular story, and Carnatic is one she was working on, and we felt that this is where we should start first, because DNA, life science is unknown to us eventually, all of us, you know. So Gary's the one who was influenced me a lot of life science. So you say, okay, let's start from where we know, the known territory to unknown territory. So Carnatic was a choice for us to work in. And we started analyzing the narration, how this connection is going to happen. And that's where we look at the story of Gary's way of looking at cyanobacteria, the earthly elements. We look at the Panchabhutas and we brought the music in from there.
Not necessary to be Carnatic, just because we are involved, so it became Carnatic, because of the theatre that we practice or the art that we practice is Carnatic. Even if it was given to John Shapley, he would have played it in this instrument. So it could have become a Western music. I won't know. So we were part of this theatre, so that is why it became Carnatic, or the rhythm became. I forgot to tell you, I call this rhythm that 42 count, 48 and a half counts beat, Amla Tala. Amla means acid in Sanskrit. So Tala means rhythm. So I call it acid Tala. I mean, there is no other way that I could explain that particular rhythm into, it's not found in any of our music books. So I had to call it Amla Tala. As Nirmala said, in fact, I asked Draupadi to sing Laman in that Tala only last month. We were rehearsing, and it was rehearsed as they were learned, they were put in that, in the traditional way. So, putting all these things, little essence on that story and make it more, to our concept. I added all these things the last rehearsal time. Each rehearsal was like very different for me. Each time I sit and watch them practicing, I thought, oh, okay, then let us not work this way, work the other way. So it was always evolving. I never planned to do all these things. So even, you know, when we went for our presentation for National Arts Council funding, and Chandra and me went first. So the chairman asked me, what are you going to, what kind of dance are you going to do? I said, I don't know. I myself do not know what his DNA is all about. So how can I explain to you what movement I'm going to do, what style of dance I'm going to choreograph? I said, I cannot tell you now. I'm sorry. So if you accept it, then you give us money, then we'll proceed with that. So that is how we were, both of us, as he says, it's an unknown territory for us. Even now, I do not know what is the next, what we are going to do. He's talking about the birth of 100 sons from Gandhari's stomach. You know, a lump, and then it was cut into pieces. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I asked Nirmala, will you give my Gandhari at that time? And she said, of course I will do. So, you know, things like that, it evolves actually. Nothing is planned or anything. And each rehearsal I said, no, it was very different. Whenever Biju comes, then, you know, even the dance become differently. And then they, you know, they improvise on stage. Yesterday's show was different than today. So those who came yesterday will know, they were improvising on stage, whatever they have learned, put that into whatever this music and then rhythm gave them. So it is not that I choreographed or that I cannot claim all these things, it was already there. And I always believe that Krishna or whoever the higher power person gave Draupadi the material to cover her body when he was disrobing. I am sure there was no person sitting there and then throwing this material to Draupadi. I don't believe in that. Maybe, who knows, she would have brought her own, you know, saliva or whatever it is to cover her body with that. She would have had that power in her, you see, to make a DNA sari on her own. We do not know. It is a myth, right? So I don't believe in like somebody sitting there and then giving them from the heaven this sari was given. I don't believe in that. So it could be something like this happen, you see. Somebody would, he or she herself would have, you know, made from her body this material. So who knows? She must have had that power of doing it. So I do not know. So all these things are like unknown to us. Thank you. I hope I answered your question.
I just quickly around that, I want to say a bit of how to share our experiences, each one, and how we came to this. Maybe I leave it to each one to just give a brief how we came experience how we met. Let me start first. Me starting with Santa was amazing because I started working with in, I think, 1980s when I was young artist. I mean, I'm still young. So, so I started the first piece, the Color Chakra, the Wheel of Time. I started with the first performance. The dancing is all below the knee level, so we did the first piece. After that, after a while, the second piece I'm working on it now. I saw, when I came back from Perth, finishing my studies, 2007 I met Santa and talked about the DNA. So we initiated that in 2007. But just a year back, for 6 years we were working on this project. For the last 6 years, we couldn't get enough funding. Nobody could understand us. We just like, nobody wanted to take us on board. We were unsure. So returning back to Santa in 2007, I talked to her a lot about this idea. Then I brought Gary back to convince her. I think eventually we got and she agreed to work with us. So I'm glad that she started off, you know. So it was good for us. With Madhura, it's amazing because we did a couple of workshops. It's a 1 year workshop. So for 1 year we did a couple of workshops. We still couldn't identify a particular artist for this particular project. So we kind of rediscovered Madhura to that last workshop that she was into weaving and textile material. So that excited us, okay, let's get Madhura on board. So we know that she's got particular knowledge in weaving and textile working for. I think that was amazing to have Madhura on board. Thank you, Madhura. Finally, a person that never can thank enough and who understands madness is Gary Cass, you know. I mean, we're always fighting over things. I remember in 2002 that we talked about this idea. I told him in the cafe, Gary, we should go for a live theater. We should go for a theater. He said, well, okay, let's go. You know, that's how we work. We just jump into it, we just take the journey. I think these are things that, you know, I started off working with my colleagues here. I think I should thank them. Well, thank you very much, Santa, Madhura, and Gary Cass for such a wonderful contribution. Before I end this presentation, is there any last questions you want to ask?
I just want to say something. Now, rhythm, Indian rhythm, you can hear, I can be loud. If there are 5 main rhythms in Indian music, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9. So, the 81 came a multiple of 9. 9 into 9 times 18. That the 9th one is very complicated. That, it's very complicated stuff. Others, 3 very easy. 4 is also. Then 5 is 7. But the 9th one is very complicated. The name itself is complicated. Sankirna means complication. Sankirna means Sanskrit means complication. So 9 you can understand. 9 means without. It's very complicated, not very common all of anywhere in the world, except in Indian music. Now this 81 is a multiple of that 9. That's how I understood. Okay, thank you.
Before we finish this presentation, I would like to thank the musicians again for the contribution, especially the dancers and not forgetting my 2 girls, Maya and Sarah's, and the banners. And I want to thank all of you for your presence. It's wonderful to make this event a wonderful evening. Thank you very much. Okay, before you leave, there's a food and dinner. Please help yourself and do the food. Thank you very much.